I'm Ashley Valenzola, and it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this year, Dr. Daniel H. Magilow. And Dr. Magilow is a professor of German in the Department of Modern Foreign Languages and Literatures at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, where he is an affiliated faculty member with the Fern and Manfred Steinfeld Program in Jewish Studies, the Cinema Studies Program, and the History Department. He earned his BA in Comparative Literature from Columbia University and his MA and PhD in German from Princeton University. He serves on the academic board of the Holocaust Educational Foundation of Northwestern University and was the Pearl Resnick Postdoctoral Fellow at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in 2005 to 2006. His teaching and research, which have been supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, the Getty Foundation, the German Academic Exchange Service, and the University of Tennessee Humanities center on photography and film and their intersections with Holocaust studies, Weimar Germany, and post-war memory. Dr. Magilow is the author of many articles, book chapters, and reviews focusing on photography, film, and memorials. Some of his most recent books include Holocaust Representation in History, an Introduction, co-authored with Lisa Silverman. It Will Yet Be Heard, a Polish Rabbi's Witness of the Shoah and Survival by Leon Thorn, edited by Dr. Magilow and Emmanuel Thorn. And The Absolute Realist, Albert Renger Patch's Collected Writings, 1923 to 1967. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Magilow. Thank you for joining us.
Coming up on this, can you all hear me? In the back, you can hear me? Coming up on this stage, I feel like I should be getting a diploma or something, the setup. Anyway, thank you so much for having me as the keynote. It's very flattering. It's a real honor, and thank you also for all the hard work and unglamorous work that goes into organizing an event of this scale. It's important for the discipline, and it is greatly appreciated. So, for those of you who were wondering, this talk is roughly in the 40 to 45 minute range in case you want to look at your watch, and so you don't find yourself in that situation of like, when's this guy gonna like shut up, you know, in case you're keeping track. But with that, I will just dive right on in. I should begin this talk with a disclaimer, because to present a keynote at a conference named Examining Holocaust Studies in Our World Today is in many regards an impossible task. But don't worry, I'm not going to get up and leave yet. I'm skeptical that I, or frankly anyone, could satisfactorily examine or overview a realm of intellectual inquiry as broad and as interdisciplinary as Holocaust studies. Still, it is a valuable conceptual challenge for us to reflect on the state of the field, because changes are certainly occurring, and in this talk I aim to map some of these shifts. In this presentation's first part, I will indulge a sort of thought experiment to show that what even counts as a shift or development in Holocaust studies varies significantly by discipline and subfield. And in the second part of my talk, I will draw on my experience as a co-editor-in-chief of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's academic journal, Holocaust and Genocide Studies, to discuss specific research questions that are currently attracting scholarly attention. And I put one of my jobs as a journal editor is to evangelize for the journal, and so I've put a few flyers for it out on the table out there in case you're interested to know more. So my argument, in short, is that as the final living connections to the Holocaust leave us, the final direct living connections leave us, and as the genocide truly becomes historical and as memory normalizes, Holocaust studies itself continues to normalize as a discipline. If traditionally it was primarily concerned with documenting and verifying crimes because of the moral and legal imperatives to prosecute perpetrators and bear witness, Holocaust studies is becoming increasingly interdisciplinary. As I hope to show, the shifts occurring across the humanities that rely on new sources, on new technologies, and on new methodologies are also taking root in Holocaust studies. And along the way, I'll tell you about 3 projects that I'm working on, sort of asides, sort of capsules, that I've been working on or have recently published to make the point that I want to do more than simply report on the state of Holocaust studies. I'm also trying to actively contribute to it. So, to begin this survey of what I see as changes, it's first necessary to reflect on what has not changed. And this point should be stressed. There are significant continuities between contemporary work in Holocaust studies and older traditions of Holocaust studies scholarship. I would submit that in the past and today, it's been a field dominated by historians and scholars from other disciplines working with historicist methodologies. To answer basic research questions, scholars have subjected sources to a kind of historian's algorithm, asking who, what, where, when, why, and to what extent. Variations of these basic questions continue to animate Holocaust research and to attract significant public attention. I'm going to look over my shoulder here and then. So when I teach my Holocaust representations course, I begin it by focusing on 7 of these foundational questions. As framed in overviews and source books, including Peter Hayes's Why, Explaining the Holocaust, Omer Bartov's The Holocaust, Origins, Implementation, Aftermath, and Donald Niewyke's textbook, The Holocaust, these historiographic debates are about origins. What were the Holocaust's origins? Was it a product of modernity itself? Was it specific to Nazi Germany? Without Hitler, would it have happened? Was it a logical outgrowth of centuries of religiously based anti-Semitism, the evidence of which we still find in books, images, and cathedral architecture? A second question is, was the Holocaust specific to a particular place and time, or could it happen anywhere? What motivated perpetrators? Did their motivations change over the course of the war, and if so, how and why? And to what extent can we attribute their crimes to deep-seated ideological convictions, and or to what extent were they motivated by peer pressure? Those of us working in Holocaust studies recognize this question as the basis of the famous intentionalism-functionalism debate of the 1990s, which, for those of you who might not know, this was a debate concerning whether the Holocaust was the culmination of a premeditated top-down plan, or if it emerged gradually from lower-level bureaucratic initiatives that responded to shifting circumstances on the ground. And so this is a slide that I use when I teach this debate to emphasize that motivations were complex and fluid, and they cannot be reduced to simple binaries. A third debate that has and continues to attract attention involves victims' experiences. On their own and intersectionally, how did categories like race, class, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, and age shape individual experiences during the Holocaust and its aftermath? How did being male or female, straight or queer, young or poor, younger, old, rich or poor, and so forth affect one's chances of survival? And a related question, which we've addressed in our panels this morning, concerns memory. How and why have some victims' experiences been remembered and others neglected? For instance, why does the belated construction of memorials to the murdered Sinti and Roma, what does that say about their status today? A fourth question concerns resistance. What possibilities existed for resistance during the Holocaust? What even counts as resistance? Was armed resistance the only legitimate variety? Did spiritual or cultural resistance exist as well? Or are those merely terms that posterity has come up with in an attempt to redeem the unredeemable? This is an image of anti-Semitic graffiti from 1933. A display box of the virulently anti-Semitic publication Der Stürmer has been defaced so that its motto, "The Jews are our misfortune," reads, "The Jews are our fortune." So, there was resistance, in spite of the famous claim by Raoul Hilberg that Jews went like lambs to the slaughter. A fifth debate, speaking of Raoul Hilberg, who was sort of the founder of Holocaust studies, a fifth debate concerns this famous trichotomy that Hilberg came up with of perpetrator, victim, bystander. How can we move beyond that triad to better understand the roles of those who were neither unambiguously perpetrators nor victims? And these include rescuers, resistors, and beneficiaries. Furthermore, how are certain categories of bystandership, such as the sacred one of rescuers, sometimes more complex than one might think? Because there are cases in which rescues took place, but the cost of that rescue was, for instance, money or some sort of sexual barter. And how also is the category of bystandership itself historical? To intervene to help a Jewish victim of violence meant something very different in Germany in 1933 than it did in occupied Eastern Europe a decade later. In 1933, helping a Jew in Germany might have been a courageous, if nevertheless stigmatized act, while the same kind of act in occupied Eastern territories in 1943 could have earned a death sentence. A sixth debate concerns possibilities of rescue. What roles did institutions like the Roman Catholic Church and the US government play in catalyzing or minimizing the killing? What did they know and when did they know it? What responsibilities did foreign governments, international organizations, NGOs, and churches have as voices of legal and moral authority? Our understandings of these issues are being broadened by the opening of the Vatican's files of the controversial wartime Pope Pius XII, and in Argentina, just about 2 weeks ago, Javier Milei, the president, promised to open files on the clandestine networks that smuggled Nazis to South America that are known as the rat lines. So a seventh debate that represents continuity in foundational questions that people have been interested in and that they're still interested in, is the seventh debate is the focus of the course that I teach about Holocaust representation. And that debate is namely, can one do justice to the Holocaust in representation, in art, in film, in literature, photography, and in other media? And considering the vast amount of cultural production connected to the Holocaust and the aftermath, can Theodore W. Adorno's famous thesis that to write a poem after Auschwitz is barbaric really be true? How has the memory of the Holocaust been instrumentalized in pursuit of various political and cultural agendas since the 1940s? These are questions about memory and representation that continue to interest scholars. Similarly, how did events like the Eichmann trial in 1961 or the opening of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in 1993 shape cultural production? And how have mass cultural films like Schindler's List shaped memory around the world? The American television miniseries Holocaust, the story of the family Weiss, famously opened the floodgates of memory in West Germany in 1979, so much so that the German Association for the Cultivation and Research of the German Language named Holocaust its word of the year in 1979, or one of its words of the year. Let me take a swig of water real quick. So these seven debates, and there are others, but to me these are seven of probably the most important ones, continue to animate research, and they demonstrate continuities in the history of Holocaust studies as a discipline. It has been crucial to answer questions like these to establish a baseline narrative of the Holocaust and its aftermath, and by and in large, this has happened. As historian Wendy Lauer has aptly observed, this is a quote, "We have laid the foundation with a basic narrative of events, with key actors from Hitler to the ordinary men and women, with varied theoretical explanations of modernity, and with myriad of motives and historical forces such as anti-Semitism, peer pressure, sadism, anti-communism, nationalism, sexism, and imperialism, to name a few," end quote. And yet, despite the continuities in scholarship, there have also been significant breaks. As Lauer herself also notes, quote, "Contrary to popular belief, we do not know all there is to know about the Holocaust." Wendy Lauer is certainly correct that there's still more to learn, and in fact, the most public narrative of the Holocaust in America, the permanent exhibition at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in D.C., is currently undergoing a major revision for the first time since it opened in 1993, for the reason that the state of research has simply changed so much and so significantly since then. We find additional evidence for Lauer's claim that there's still more to learn in the increasingly broad disciplinary reach of Holocaust studies, particularly since the memory boom of the 1990s, when there were suddenly all sorts of films and museums and literature and everybody was talking about the Holocaust all over the place. Particularly since this boom in the 1990s, Holocaust studies has rapidly expanded across disciplines, catalyzed new scholarship, and attracted broad public interest. Today, if you were to ask scholars based in various fields to identify how Holocaust studies is changing, you'd probably get very different answers. And so in the next section of this talk, I'd like to indulge this thought experiment for a few minutes. How would people from various disciplines identify the changes going on in Holocaust studies? So for instance, if you were to ask a historian examining Holocaust studies in our world today, what they see as the changes, they might identify as contemporary trends the four overarching themes of the forthcoming Cambridge History of the Holocaust, for which Mark Roseman is serving as the general editor. Together, these 4 volumes include over 100 original essays, which address, respectively, the historical context out of which the Holocaust emerged, the perpetration of the Holocaust, the experiences of victims, and the aftermath. We can already identify traces of historiographic shifts in the volume titles alone. For example, the name of the first component volume, Contexts, Origins, Comparisons, Entanglements, alludes to recent debates about the extent to which we can compare the Holocaust to acts of mass atrocities committed in colonial contexts. Whereas previously, the Holocaust's uniqueness was practically a given, and it was indeed practically a taboo to suggest otherwise, that consensus seems to be shifting somewhat. The discussion intensified in May 2021 when the historian Dirk Moses published his polemical essay, The German Catechism, which generated dozens of responses from scholars. In this article, Moses argued that there are 5 unspoken protocols that govern what one can and cannot say about the Holocaust in Germany. And it was a polemical kind of essay, so he was trying to get a rise out of people, I think, as part of this in identifying these unspoken protocols. But they are, number 1, the Holocaust is unique. Number 2, the Holocaust marked a civilizational rupture. Number 3, Germany has a special responsibility to Jews in Germany and in Israel. Number 4, anti-Semitism is a distinct prejudice, and moreover, it was a uniquely German one. And then lastly, that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. But whereas the original debate about the Holocaust uniqueness that took place in the 1980s, that was called the Historikerstreit, or the historians' debate, that debate was comparing Nazi crimes with Stalin's crimes. But this newer version, which has been called Historikerstreit 2.0, clever, isn't it? Challenges the uniqueness narrative by examining the affinities between the Holocaust and colonial crimes, specifically the genocide of the Herero and Nama in what is today Namibia. The photograph of the woman holding the rifle that's used to illustrate the German catechism is an image from a 2015 series by the German-American artist and photographer Mark Erwin Babé called Unser Afrika, Our Africa. In his photographs, Babé mimics the style of Nazi propaganda images in their sort of perfect Aryan types, but he inverts the context. So for instance, this photograph restages Willy Brandt's famous act of Holocaust penance in Warsaw in 1970, the so-called Warschauer Kniefall, the Warsaw knee fall, or the Warsaw genuflection. It recasts it as an act for German colonial crimes in calling it the Swakopmunder Kniefall, right? So the comparison is not particularly subtle there. This debate about the Holocaust uniqueness attracted a significant amount of attention among scholars anyway, and the archive and an archive of responses to Moses's polemic is available at the New Fascism Syllabus website. If we continue with this thought experiment about what counts as change today in Holocaust studies across disciplines, we find that many of the issues that interest historians also animate contemporary work among scholars in literary and cultural studies, but others diverge considerably. We can discern some of these discipline-specific trends from another forthcoming Cambridge history, this one, the Cambridge History of Holocaust Literature, but the literary historians get 1 volume instead of the 4 that the historians get. The group of contributors whom editors Aaron McLaughlin and Stuart Taberner have assembled are very explicitly not just rewriting the history of the Holocaust literary canon, which is often broken down along national lines. Instead, as McLaughlin and Taberner have argued, their volume aims to, quote, grasp Holocaust literature as a global literary system rather than as a collection of texts in discrete languages or national traditions, end quote. To this end, the chapters in their history coalesce around three key themes: context, canon, and circulation. In their words, these chapters, quote, explore Holocaust literature as a response to the horror of the event itself, as a product, at least in part, of the context in which it was written, and as an assemblage of literary artifacts that circulate or that do not circulate according to the vagaries of publishers' choices, the politics and practices of translation, evolving genre conventions, geopolitical relationships, and readers' changing tastes, end quote. So to accomplish its goals, the Cambridge History of Holocaust Literature thus offers expanded attention to previously underexplored or unexplored topics. To name just a few, these include the place of Yiddish in Holocaust literature. So here, for instance, we see Elie Wiesel's Und die Welt hat geschwiegen, the 246-page Yiddish language book published in Buenos Aires in the mid-1950s that served as the basis for Night, which is only about half as long. Another topic of interest, and that is covered in the Cambridge History of Holocaust Literature, is the representation of the Holocaust in graphic novels, such as Miriam Katin's We Are on Our Own, Ari Fulman and David Polanski's graphic adaptation of Anne Frank's diary, and The Boxer by Reinhard Kleist, which was recently made into the HBO film The Survivor. A third topic in the Cambridge History of Holocaust Literature concerns the Holocaust's representation in contexts beyond Europe and North America, especially in the global South, as well as the Holocaust experiences of those of non-European descent. For instance, Half-Blood Blues and Clifford's Blues are both novels about the experiences of blacks in Nazi Germany. And so I mentioned at the start of my talk that I'll be periodically tossing in a few of the things that I'm working on to demonstrate that I'm trying to not just report on Holocaust studies, but contribute to it as well. I'm also a contributor to the Cambridge History of Holocaust Literature, and the chapter that I'm writing was inspired by the events here in Tennessee in 2022, when I'm sure many of you recall that the McMinn County School Board banned Art Spiegelman's Mouse. In my chapter, I draw on David Roski's concept of scandalous memory, which describes the upheaval produced by works of Holocaust literature that violate readers' horizon of expectations, that transgress accepted boundaries, and that break with extant writing practices. I argue that while censorship and free expression are usually understood as antitheses, these scandalous texts have in fact proven vital for establishing the canon of Holocaust literature. So in other words, censorship doesn't remove texts from circulation, rather it reinforces their canonical status. You know, McMinn County banning Art Spiegelman's Mouse was probably the best thing for sales of mouse in, you know, quite a long time. So to continue this thought experiment about broader disciplinary shifts in Holocaust studies, we can turn from history and literature to other disciplines. We're one to ask scholars in musicology and sound studies to identify contemporary trends. They might point to work about the acoustic experience of the Holocaust. In a recent article in Holocaust and Genocide Studies titled Acoustic Assaults on the Auschwitz-Birkenau Concourse, Sarah Sewell investigates what it sounded like to arrive at a concentration camp and how victims experienced acoustic assault in the form of cries, wails, gunshots, barking, anti-Semitic slurs, and loudly screamed German language commands. Sewell argues that, quote, by generating an atmosphere of chaos and confusion through sound, the Nazis achieved their chief objective, prisoner compliance. Acoustic assaults inflicted somatic and psychological pain that manifested itself physically. Many deportees responded to the censorial onslaught with their own sonorous outpourings. Cries, wails, and screams flooded the concourse as evidence of their trauma, end quote. And another example, in her work on situations of killing in which victims were forced to sing, Alexandra Birch has similarly demonstrated how a sound and voice studies perspective on testimonies can shed light on how music performance was itself traumatic, as in orchestras forced to play it at Auschwitz. Sound was its own kind of weapon during the Holocaust, and this work in sound and musicology bespeaks an interest in the Holocaust as part of a broader history of the senses. So let's end this thought experiment, the first part of this talk, about the increasingly broad disciplinary breadth of Holocaust studies with one final example. Were we to ask film scholars about what topics are driving work in Holocaust studies, their answers might concern recent Academy Award-nominated films about the Holocaust and its aftermath, in its traumatic aftermath, such as Jonathan Glazer's The Zone of Interest, Brady Corbett's The Brutalist, Jesse Eisenberg's A Real Pain, or Robert Monio's The Ice Cream Man. Or they might point to recent documentary films, such as Steve McQueen's Occupied City and Andreas Weil's Riefenstahl. And some of these films haven't even been distributed yet, so this is all, I'm anticipating that these will be topics of interest. Film scholars might also point to work on unreleased films, such as the 220 hours of footage excluded from Claude Lanzmann's Shoah. These are what are known as the Shoah outtakes. Another unreleased film that has attracted some interest is Jerry Lewis's never completed and never released film, The Day the Clown Cried. It's the subject of a forthcoming documentary by Eric Lurie called From Darkness to Light. The Day the Clown Cried has almost a cult status as one of the worst films ever made. It was like a Holocaust clown, and it was never released because it was just that scandalous. But of course, as more sentiments and ideas change and normalize, the time has come, I think, for this film to finally come to light. Like literary scholars, film scholars remain interested in questions about the politics of Holocaust representation and medium-specific considerations of film as film, not as just another historical source. For instance, with its palpable lack of the familiar and graphic tropes of Holocaust films, The Zone of Interest has also raised questions about how, in a media-saturated culture in which films are spreading knowledge of the Holocaust more than books, how it is that Holocaust memory increasingly relies less on actual historical evidence and more on aesthetic representation. Martin Mullinger has argued that the Holocaust's visual archive has become more and more self-referential. Allusions in Holocaust films and literature, in other words, are often not allusions to historical events, but to other works of film and literature. These shifts in the study of Holocaust film also offer me another opportunity to share some of my own work. I'm contributing a chapter to an edited volume about The Zone of Interest, edited by Simone Gigliotti and James Williams. In my essay, I reject the popular reception of The Zone of Interest as somehow fundamentally paradigm shifting because it focuses on perpetrators' banal lives rather than on graphic violence. I argue instead that the film should be understood as one of several recent fictional and non-fictional Holocaust films that are products of a conceptual reorientation that I term the Höcker album effect. The Höcker album effect describes a shift away from representations that visualize the public cultural memory of the Holocaust and that instead represent the private communicative memory of the same. In practical terms, this means focusing less on graphic violence against Jews and on Jews' experiences and more on how Nazi perpetrators perceive their own actions. To articulate these perpetrators' self-perceptions, these films echo the vernacular visual language that perpetrators used in their own private photographs and family albums in which they recorded their wartime memories and experiences. The trend takes its name from the photograph album of Karl Friedrich Höcker and its shocking pictures of Auschwitz officers, guards, and female auxiliaries as they callously relax on lawn chairs, sing songs, and eat blueberries during their leisure time. My point with this thought experiment has been that even if similar foundational questions have long animated Holocaust studies across disciplines, and those are those debates that I mentioned, and even as the interests among different kinds of scholars sometimes overlap, the question of what's happening in Holocaust studies today will generate different answers depending on who you ask. So with this overview in mind, I can now turn to the second part of this talk, in which I will specify my own answer to the question, what are some contemporary trends in the study of the Holocaust? But before I can provide these examples, I must first explain the institutional position that allows me to make this kind of judgment. My credential for offering a map of contemporary trends in Holocaust studies is the role in which I have served for 3.5 years with my colleague in Knoxville, Helene Zinrich, as one of the co-editors-in-chief of Holocaust and Genocide Studies. As many of you likely know, Holocaust and Genocide Studies, or HGS as I'll refer to it, is the academic journal of the Jack Joseph and Morton Mandel Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. HGS currently publishes 3 issues per year, and each issue contains somewhere between 8 and 12 articles and maybe a dozen or so book reviews. Annually, HGS receives roughly 150 to 200 manuscript submissions from scholars around the world, including full-length articles, research notes, and book reviews. Collectively, this volume of submissions gives one a clear sense of which topics and concerns are and are not animating contemporary research. But aside from their volume, another way to use these submissions to Holocaust and Genocide Studies to gauge the state of the field is through the many proposals for special issues that scholars submit to the journal. These proposals typically emerge from conferences or workshops, some but not all of them sponsored by the Holocaust Museum in DC. As journal editors, Helene Zinrich and I ask potential guest editors to submit written proposals that describe the research questions that their topic generates, how it engages with existing scholarship, the methodologies used in the contributions, and the ways the special issue accords with the journal's intellectual mission. We also ask guest editors to draft a call for papers so that we can be sure that any special issue is not just the work of a small clique of Holocaust scholars, but rather one that is drawing from across the discipline as a whole. And once we receive a complete proposals, we send it to the journal's editorial board of 10 colleagues that provides feedback on it and recommends that we accept it or reject it. And then, and only then, do these articles go out for double-blind peer review, which many of them do not survive. But many of them do, with revisions and whatnot. Anyway, why am I explaining this behind-the-scenes editorial process in such tedious and granular detail? Well, it's to emphasize that it's not simply my co-editor and I who are deciding what the contemporary trends in Holocaust studies are. Our role as journal editors is often more administrative than intellectual. By shepherding manuscripts and proposals for special issues through a rigorous review process, we make it possible for a wider community of scholars, you, in short, including authors, editorial board members, and blind peer reviewers, to decide which topics and research questions rise to the level of meriting a special issue in the journal. So, in the remainder of this talk, I'll take us behind the scenes and describe some of the recently published or forthcoming or planned special issues of the journal, because these, I believe, represent some of the main trends that are animating Holocaust studies today. I will group these topics into 3 sets, but I should stress that there's significant overlap among them. I'll begin with 2 special issues whose main characteristic is their use of new or underutilized sources. One is on the theme of awkward objects. The articles are united by the analytical category of awkwardness, which, as the anthropologists Erika Lehrer and Roma Sendica and the cultural historian Magdalena Waligórska argue in their introduction, awkwardness is a term that, quote, connotes confusion, disinformation, inconvenience, and a stuckness between directions, end quote. In Holocaust studies, these awkward objects refer to objects that, unlike those that have drawn substantial attention and been celebrated as valuable sources of knowledge, have instead been marginalized or discarded as unreliable, unworthy, incidental, or bizarre. And so what you see in this image are examples of these kinds of objects that are relegated outside of mainstream Holocaust debate. And in this case, it's graffiti that prisoners wrote. So graffiti is an object of study, but also other kinds of awkward objects include folk art, hand-drawn maps, 3-dimensional dioramas, sketches accompanying oral testimony, and so forth. Another forthcoming special issue of HGS, oriented around a new kind of source, concerns Holocaust photography. As the guest editor, Valerie Hebert, argued in her proposal, photographs figure centrally in Holocaust memory, yet for various reasons, including ethical sensitivities or the naive belief that photographs' meanings are obvious, they have not been fully integrated into teaching and research. Photo archives at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Yad Vashem, and elsewhere house hundreds of thousands of photographs, yet the vast majority of these photographs remain unseen. Meanwhile, a handful of iconic images, The Boy in the Warsaw Ghetto, Anne Frank, Arbeit macht frei, are circulated and recirculated. So the sorts of questions that the article in this special issue examine include, but are not limited to, what even counts as a Holocaust photograph, what ethical considerations attend showing and looking at atrocity photographs, how have photographs functioned in narrative and institutional contexts like museums, classrooms, and private albums? For instance, how did the photograph albums that Wehrmacht soldiers assembled using images from their time at the front, how did those albums confirm or contradict narratives of collective memory? You look at some of these albums and these guys seem to be having a pretty good time. They didn't seem to be that sad or remorseful at all. So and photographs can be useful in helping us understand them. Since Holocaust photography happens to be my area of research expertise, this special issue offers an opportunity to talk to you about another example of my own research on a related topic with Holocaust photography. And this is the topic of so-called Shoah selfies, selfies taken at Holocaust sites. These kinds of selfies these self-portraits often inspire outrage and anxieties, and they inspire a crisis of memory, or rather they cause people to say there's a crisis of memory. Kids these days, they don't understand what's going on. Like, look how disrespectful they are taking these pictures of themselves. That's what always happens when these images go viral. However, I'm arguing that there's more to these images than just youthful narcissism, although there certainly seems to be a lot of that. I argue instead that Shoah selfies should be understood as social photographs, which in media theorist Nathan Jurgensen's definition are digital images whose, quote, existence as a standalone media object is subordinate to its existence as a unit of communication, end quote. In social media streams, social photographs like these contribute to the photographer's ongoing narrative of self-fashioning. In other words, people taking images of themselves at Holocaust sites are trying to say, I'm the kind of person who goes to Holocaust sites, right? And it's not, so there's more than just the kind of narcissism. This also typifies the rise of what scholar Diana Popescu has termed post-witnessing, which is the urge to investigate the past by undertaking a real and not only imaginary journey of discovery at Holocaust sites. And this is actually in many ways, the theme of the film A Real Pain, that Kieran Culkin just won the Best Supporting Actor for, because they're traveling around Poland visiting these sites. So in short, I argue that Shoah selfies show how new media are affecting tremendous shifts in Holocaust memory. And at the same time, I would note the gross overrepresentation of young women and effeminate men as targets of this kind of shaming show how this response to offensive Holocaust photography concurrently has a way of sustaining other kinds of agendas, gender hierarchies in particular. So returning to special issues, a second group of special issues share an interest in the transnational dimensions of the Holocaust. The articles in these issues concern geographic interconnectedness, not just politically and economically, but also culturally and psychologically. These projects approach the Holocaust as the context for broadening our knowledge about the ways that people, goods, ideas, cultures, capital, and policies move across boundaries. For instance, a recently published special issue of HGS, edited by Karin Kvist-Geverts and Pontus Rudberg, examines the Holocaust at one of its geographic margins. While the Nordic countries share similar cultures, languages, and borders, their national histories varied widely during the Holocaust. The articles in this issue question, for example, narratives of Norwegian victimhood and Swedish neutrality, while also examining Finnish collaboration with the SS. A second special issue in this category of the Holocaust's transnational dimensions is titled Knowledge on the Move and is edited by Ann-Christine Klotz and Lorien Vastenhut. This collection of articles considers the movement of knowledge during and after the Holocaust. Some of the basic research questions that they pose include what even constitutes knowledge in the context of the Holocaust, and through what networks did this knowledge circulate, and how was it exchanged? To answer these questions, one article examines, for instance, letters dating from the Holocaust to investigate what was known and when it was known. Another article uses the case study of Australia to shed light on how information about the Holocaust was or was not transmitted globally. Another submission examines how ghettoized Jews shared knowledge with each other through rumors. So again, about how knowledge circulates. And finally, HGS has recently published a special virtual issue on the issue of migration in the Holocaust, because immigration continues to attract significant scholarly, political, and humanitarian attention. We curated a collection of articles that are open access. You can go to the HGS website. These are articles that have all appeared in the journal since about 2022, and they demonstrate how the interest in immigration, migration, moving beyond boundaries that animate so much of our political discourse today is also a topic that interests scholars in Holocaust studies. So this third category of special issues draws on new methodologies that engage with scholarship in the digital humanities, the history of emotions, gender studies, and political science. One project guest edited by Tim Cole, Paul Jaskett, Ann Kelly Knowles, and Alberto Giordano is dedicated to the digital humanities. Digital humanities, you may know, involves applying computational tools and methods like data visualization, text mining, and mapping to traditional humanities disciplines. The manuscripts in this special issue address topics like how one might apply a computational model to Holocaust testimonies, how you could listen to them digitally, how it is that digital Holocaust memory has unfolded in the global South, how the archives of the Soviet Extraordinary State Commission are being made accessible digitally, and so on. Summarizing the goals of this special issue, Ann Kelly Knowles argues that its contributions, quote, exemplify how digital approaches can generate new knowledge about the Holocaust, open avenues for collaboration, research, and teaching, and create new modes of expression to communicate our understanding to the academic community and the public, end quote. And this image that you see is of a new project to basically use artificial intelligence and holography to reanimate Holocaust survivors so that after they're gone, students in particular could still interact with them. It's a very controversial project for any number of reasons, but it certainly is the kind of thing that is sparking discussion and debate. All right, so another forthcoming special issue of HGS concerns emotions in Holocaust studies. Guest editors Kobe Kabalik and Stephanie Fisher have assembled articles on some fascinating topics such as screams as embodied affective expressions, terror, panic, and horror as responses to anti-Jewish violence in pre-war Germany in the place of anger and disgust in liberator accounts. In a methodological contribution about the place of affect in Holocaust studies, Lisa Peschel identifies 4 key questions that a focus on emotions and their representation can answer. And these questions are, how do people remember their feelings about events as opposed to the events themselves? How do the norms of social groups shape both the experience and recording of feelings? How might individuals' emotional goals lead them to instrumentalize their testimony in ways that affect how they are expressed? What can we consider valid evidence for subjectively experienced emotion in the past? There are several other special issues in our queue. As you can see, we have a lot of special issues in our queue. Some of them, if people don't turn in their homework, may not happen. You know how that goes, right? But there are several more that are kind of still in the embryonic stages, so I'll only discuss them briefly. For their special issue about men as gendered beings, Björn Krondorfer and Christine Suke have assembled manuscripts about masculinity during the Holocaust. The topics of these articles include, for instance, honor and martial masculinity in the Jewish ghettowache, like, the masculinity of the Jewish police officers in the Warsaw Ghetto. Polish Jewish masculinities in German-occupied Warsaw, masculinity in Primo Levi's If This Is a Man. A special issue titled Quantification in the Holocaust, edited by Claire Zalk, Robert Brown, and Antoine Perdoncin, analyzes the role of numbers in Holocaust history and memory through manuscripts that examine topics like the political uses and controversies that surround statistics and counts, as well as the methods and limits for collecting and analyzing quantitative material about the Holocaust. And this image that you see is of a book that's really, it's not really a book, it's really more of a piece of performance art, a kind of art project in which the word Jew has been printed 6 million times in this very large book, so it takes up 1,250 pages to make the point about the scale of the Holocaust. So these are the kinds of issues that this special issue on quantification in quantification in the Holocaust will address. So one final one, and then I'll conclude. We have a special issue in the works edited by Scott Strauss and Robert Brown that examines the influential model among political scientists known as cumulative radicalization. In the context of the Holocaust, cumulative radicalization is, and I'm quoting from their call for papers, quote, anchored in the idea that, informed by animating but ultimately somewhat vague ideas from the Nazi leadership, subnational officials interpreted instructions, competed with their peers, and invented policies of violence in the field. It highlights interactions between national decision makers and subnational actors, inquiring whether and how their actions mutually constitute one another and drive escalation of policies of violence. These are just some of the interdisciplinary projects that scholars are working on in Holocaust studies today. I'm sure that editors of other journals in the field could point to important topics they're animating research as well. In no way is this a comprehensive set of what's happening now. So, by way of conclusion, as I hope this survey has shown, scholars in Holocaust studies remain driven by one big question that has long catalyzed research, the question of why. Because this question, why the Holocaust? Why did this have to happen? How can we make sense of it? Because this question is so foundational, we find clear continuities that link the research of the first generations of Holocaust scholars to subsequent generations. At the same time, significant changes are occurring that reflect the interests of a new cohort of researchers and the new sources, methods, and technologies at their disposal. I believe that Holocaust studies remains relevant for the obvious reason that it can teach us about the consequences of unchecked racism, anti-Semitism, intolerance, and disinformation. As emerges from a recent study of Holocaust knowledge and awareness that the Claims Conference conducted in 8 countries, the US, the UK, France, Austria, Germany, Poland, Hungary, and Romania, as their survey showed, ignorance about basic facts remains widespread around the world. For instance, 48% of Americans could not name even one of the 40,000 concentration camps, killing centers, killing sites, transit camps, or ghettos that were established during World War II. 21% of Americans did not know that 6 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust, and a notable subset believed that fewer than 2 million were killed. Imparting such basic knowledge remains important to us as educators because the Holocaust remains, as Jeffrey Chandler has written, the master moral paradigm. And thus, like it or not, the Holocaust continues to inform all order of contemporary political analogies, many of them based on gross historical inaccuracies. I should stress that the importance of Holocaust studies to me is a function of its interdisciplinary character. Like other disciplines in the humanities and social sciences, it teems with controversies and evolving research questions. As such, it offers a space for learning to think critically about complex issues, to navigate nuance and ambiguity, to learn to communicate ideas with rhetorical efficacy, and to broaden cultural awareness. Consequently, I believe that the study of the genocide of Europe's Jews should not simply be reduced or instrumentalized into a set of diagnostic tools or lessons whose exclusive purpose is to help make sense of contemporary political situations. In other words, if you ask me the question that I feel like I've been asked quite a lot of late, whether I think what's happening in the United States now is like what happened in Germany in the 1930s, my answer will be an unsatisfying one informed by the many complexities and ambiguities that interest scholars in Holocaust studies. I'd tell them in many ways it is, and in other ways it isn't. Thank you.